This is the In the Rabbit Hole episode archive project. What you're about to watch and listen to is a past episode from In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival Podcast. You can learn more by visiting intherabbithole.com. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel now.
And now, two guys that got taken to an alien ship only to be brought to their leader, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In today's episode, we strive for survival perfection and then smack ourselves on the nose with a rolled-up newspaper. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
And you are in the rabbit hole. Safe and sound. Whether you're already a crack shot or have never taken a bit of instruction in your life, we could all become better marksmen. Join the volunteers at Project Appleseed for a day or even a weekend of rifle instruction that is second to none. Find out where marksmanship meets history by connecting with the good folks at appleseedinfo.org or click on the 3 Strikes of the Match banner under the We Support heading in the right-hand column of In the Rabbit Hole. Remember, your rifle isn't going to shoot itself. So impress your friends, impress your neighbors the next time you're at the range. And don't miss out on the chance to shoot for free and earn your rifleman's patch today. Today's show topic dovetails into what we were talking about last week. We alluded to this concept of the myth of perfect survival. And it's such a big topic, we're actually going to dedicate a whole show to it. And we've done some other shows in the past that relate to the show, and we've done it in different ways. But today we're really going to lay out why perfect survival is a myth. But before that, we have some current events that we want to cover with you. Jonathan?
So for those of you who live in these areas, I'm sure you're going to be very familiar with what's going on. But I wanted to remind everybody out there that, disasters happen and they happen regularly. And right now, the country as a whole has a bunch of them going on. And if you don't know about them, so I wanted to kind of just let everybody know. Right now, Tropical Storm Debbie is in the Gulf. So for those of you, according to all of the patterns I've seen, there's no telling. It could be heading towards the Florida Panhandle, and it might be heading towards Houston. So if you're anywhere between Houston and the Florida Panhandle, know that Tropical Storm Debbie is coming somewhere towards you. Sorry, I can't be more specific, but, the computer models are just not that accurate quite yet. I'm sure they'll get much more accurate in the next day or so.
I dated a crazy girl named Debbie that I'm reminded in a lot of ways about that.
Named a lot of my exes Tropical Storm and or Hurricane.
Exactly.
In addition to hurricanes, so on the opposite end of the spectrum, hurricanes being wet, flooding, tornado kind of things. On the opposite end of the spectrum, in Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and California, there are massive wildfires going. In Colorado, actually, one of them apparently yesterday spiked off in the Estes Park region, which is right near the Rocky Mountain National Park. So for those of you in those areas, be prepared. And for anyone who's in areas that aren't these, this is just a reminder that these things kind of spin up pretty fast. I mean, Debbie actually kind of came out of nowhere late last week, and it's real early in the season for something to be hitting the Gulf. This is actually very early in the season for something to be hitting the Gulf. I know in all the years that I lived there, and Aaron, you've been there a long time too, usually it's much later in the season, like September.
Mm-hmm.
Time late August, but it's very rarely this early that you'll see things hit over in the Gulf. And then as far as those wildfires go, again, this seems kind of early in the summer for the wildfires to be kicking off, especially considering that places like Colorado had a real wet winter. They had a lot of snow this winter. Luckily, places like Austin, where I am, had a much wetter spring. So we don't see any wildfires kicking off quite yet. And for those of you who can't hear it, I'm knocking on wood right now because I don't want to jinx anything. But basically, all that said, it's really, make sure you're prepared. Check your bob, check your car, make sure everything's ready, make sure you have a little fuel, and stay safe.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it drives home a point that as preppers and survivalists, however we want to label ourselves, it drives home the point that often, we get excited about the dramatic things, but these are the things that are more likely to happen to us. So,
Right.
and that leads us into today's show as far as preparing for this kind of stuff and the myth that there is a perfect way to do anything. And this applies to anything in life. It doesn't matter what we're talking about, but within the concept and confines of this show, there was a forum post. We have a section where listeners can go on and start threads about shows that they would like to hear about. And one of the ones that somebody posted was that they wanted a show on the perfect bug out vehicle. And, John and you and I have joked years back. I mean, and actually, I think at one point it was more serious than joking about all the different kinds of vehicles and what we'd like to do to them. And I want a plane, and I want a boat, and I want a train, and an automobile too. And if John Candy can make an appearance, that would be super too. But
Well, to what you just said, it's not just the different types of vehicles we kept talking about. It was always, even if we picked a truck, right? I think we talked about some form of a rally type truck, something that could run the Baja. And then there was always the what is it, the Mog?
Oh, Unimog.
Unimog. There was always something that was Unimog related because, of course, the Baja trucks can't pull anything. They're lightweight and all that. They're just fast and nimble, and they can go through anything. But then you got the Unimog. They can go through a lot of stuff, but it's not fast, but it can pull anything. And it's kind of that whole idea where striving for perfection is a great thing, as long as you realize that perfection itself is unattainable.
Yeah, and that's so true. And that leads us into where I got into the conversation. I was like, that is an awesome show topic, and I would love to be able to do it. But here are the problems that Jonathan and I and Jason McConnell ran through when we used to talk about all the different ways, all the different modes of transportations, and trying to come up with this perfect solution for everything. And it depends. And it's, you're going to hear that a lot in today's episode. It all depends, because and this was my response on the forum, was this is the problem. It depends on where are we bugging out to? How far away are we trying to get? What is the disaster that we're talking about? It depends on so many things. So you end up, and I joked about it a few minutes ago, but you need a sailboat for this, and you need an airplane for this, and I need a helicopter for this, and I'm also going to need a miniature helicopter so that I can get to my bigger helicopter that I store further away, and on and on and on. And that's the problem that we run into. There is no perfect solution when it comes to this or not. And that was kind of my response, and I even apologize for kind of shutting the thread down a little bit, and because people were talking about their perfect idea of a bug out vehicle and everything. And when I stepped away from it, and after I answered it, I thought, actually, having a show about the perfect bug out vehicle would be a perfect topic, because we can talk about this idea that perfection in survival is a myth. And to go back to some of the, just for fun, some of the crazier stuff that we thought through, Neil Strauss in his book Emergency had that, what is it? I think it's a gyrocopter.
Yeah, those little mini helicopter things.
Yeah, and he had one of those, and at one point he got, what is the name of that motorcycle that he got? Which is amazing, I forgot it because I did a Friday Gear Report on it a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I love those things. I can't remember the name of that either. I don't know.
Well, we'll link to it in the show notes. But it was basically a motorcycle that you could put fuel in the tires and do all this other stuff, and they're super lightweight, and they're darn near indestructible. And the sailboat was probably the funniest, because the sailboat was in reaction to what if there is complete and utter political collapse of the United States and everything like that, and how would we get out? And I threw out sailboat because I was like, well, sailboat, it's pretty easy to repair with the skills and knowledge and everything else. You can pretty much go anywhere with it. But it was only perfect in that concept. If I'm trying to get away from a hurricane, sailboat's not going to do me a lot of good. It all completely depends on what we're talking about. Thank you, Rokon. Thank you, Jonathan, for posting that in there. So Rokon was the name of the motorcycle we were talking about a few minutes ago. But, we can look at this also when we look at the perfect gun. That's a big one. And people love, us included. Obviously, we're not going to exclude ourselves from that conversation. But when you get on survival forums, whether it's ours or any of them, the conversation about what is the perfect gun, comes up, or what is the perfect cache of gun, or what is the perfect round. That's a very exciting conversation. Well, do I take 5.56? Do I get 6.8? What about 308? What about just on and on and on?
Yeah, is it 9mm? Is it 45? And there's a million opinions and a million right answers and a million wrong answers. And at the end of the day, at the end of the day, I think I've got, most likely, in my mind, for where I am right now, the perfect gun safe. Meaning, if you took everything in it, it might be the perfect thing. But there is no perfect gun for any situation in every situation. It just doesn't exist, just like everything else.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things, and I know I fell victim to this too, was looking for the perfect rifle that was good for both close quarters and long range. Usually I try to stay away from newer calibers, and I've always ended up coming back to the 5.56 and the 308 for availability and for availability of parts in those weapons and stuff. But recently I got really excited about the 300 Blackout, and I was meeting with a new gunsmith having my FAL repaired. I started talking to him about the 300 Blackout. I was like, what is your opinion? Because I'm seeing these stats on this thing and it looks amazing. I mean, it's got more punch than the 5.56. It's got almost within reason distance of 308, and it's supposed to be great in close quarters, and it's very easily suppressed. And he asked me, and he's like, well, what are you into? And we started talking about Appleseed and things like that. And he's like, well, you're going to be really disappointed in the accuracy. And he's like, I hate to break this to you because everybody is pretty excited about the round, but because of the lack of shoulder in the casing, it just doesn't seat as well as some of these other rounds. He's like, yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to it, but don't, you're right to try to stay away from the hype about things. He's like, it is not, and it was funny because he actually said it is not the perfect bullet. I'm sorry, doesn't exist.
Admit it though. Admit it. You shed a tear when he said.
Genuinely, I did, because at first, like I said, I don't get excited about new rounds. I'm like, let's see what happens with it. But I was seeing so many reports, and it is still a very cool round for a lot of stuff and a lot of applications, but it's not perfect. It doesn't do everything great. It does a lot of things very well, and some things like exceptionally well, but it's still lacking in some areas, as far as if you were looking for one gun to be your end-all be-all, which I think most of us have, if you've been in survival for a while, and guns are something that is a tool that you can partake of, we'll say it that way. You're not in some area that completely shuts down your ability to defend yourself. Then we've all kind of been through that at some point, of trying to figure out the perfect survival cache of weapons and trying to find that one gun that'll fit all of our needs, from just basic home defense all the way up through, defending ourselves against the zombie apocalypse.
I have a special gun just for the zombie apocalypse.
You do. I've seen it. It's quite impressive.
It's awesome, and it's just 22, but it's fantastic. And one day we can talk about it.
We've joked about bug out bags, our ridiculous bug out bags, especially mine, I think, in the earlier episodes. And that was another thing too, and that's what led to having these really ridiculous bug out bags, was that we were trying to come up with the perfect bug out bag for everything. And that's the problem. You couldn't put everything you'd need in it for every possible situation. And this is in part a warning to anybody getting started off in prep that is spending more time, money, and energy in their bug out bags than is probably necessary. And that you cannot physically carry everything you would ever need in a bug out bag. You can carry all the information and skills you might ever need, in your head, and that's one thing that we've always harped on a lot is focusing on skills over gear and stuff. And even recently I was trying to strip back down my bug out bag and think about what was in it. And I was really surprised by, as far as my attitude now, how most of the stuff I was stripping out of my old bag, I was just like, I don't need this. I don't need this much junk. I don't need this much stuff. These are not realistic scenarios, or even the scenarios that were remotely possible. I can cover it with what's in my head for the most part. So, and moving on to there, to beat up the topic a little more, we can talk about perfect food storage. There's no such thing as perfect food storage. All food will eventually go bad or get to the point where you just don't want to eat it, almost no matter how hungry you are. And then there's the problem of space. Most of us just don't have the space to store up. A lot of people, especially people living in apartments and stuff, even storing up a month or 3 months worth of food is difficult for them. Plus, if you're on a budget and everything else. But then we have the issue of perfect food to eat for that period of time. I mean, what are you going to cook on a regular basis? I mean, some people can stand eating the same thing day in, day out, but most of us can't. So there's no perfect food there. Like, people look at MREs and then they'll stock up all these MREs. And that's fine if that's what you're doing and you're aware that this is going to suck, but that it is a perfect answer to those problems. And the other problem that you run into with food is if you have to leave that location and you have all this food, well, then it's not like the Jetsons where George Jetson's car used to fold up to the size of a billfold and be able to fit in the back of his pocket. Now we have issues with, well, what happens if I have to leave this place and I have to leave all this food behind because I have no perfect bug out vehicle to transport that food in. If somebody ever does come up with the George Jetson version of preparedness of how to store your supplies, please let us know. We'll buy two. They're small.
Yeah, I'm going to totally get me a George Jetson backpack that I can just throw some blank matter into and end up with some food or a shovel or anything else I might need. And hopefully it doesn't run on anything powered like gasoline or something. It just runs on air.
Magic, fairy tales, and unicorns.
Yeah, air. Come on.
Air. There's lots of it.
That's how I plan to run all my appliances.
And I think this also leads us to, we mentioned the forum a little while ago, and we're going to mention it several times today because there's some really great stuff that's been coming out of the forum. Even from day one, some really great. Some of it's just really cool information, some of it's really cool thoughts, and some of it's just, the camaraderie and knowing that there's other people out there that are either going through the same thing you have or have been through the same thing you have, and their great thoughts on it. And one of them that I'd like to bring up today that I think in a lot of ways illustrates what we're talking about, and this one was by a guy that goes by Navy Jim, who's an if you'll excuse me, I think actually even he calls himself an old timer on there. But Navy Jim has got some really cool thoughts, and one of them that applies today, and it's a little long, but bear with it. It's great stuff. So he starts off by saying, "It's been my observation these days when a person first gets into prepping, it's hard to resist going overboard and over budget. There's so much to get, so much to do, never enough money, and seemingly so little time left to do it. The new prepper reads all the experts telling them not to rush, develop a plan, have a budget, don't go into debt, set a schedule, get training over time, and build up your preps over months or years. That's easy for them to say." A quick interjection here. Neither Jonathan nor I ever claim to be an expert or to be as far along as any of these things.
Nope, not at all.
So, but to go on, they already have years of food, water stored, a great bug out location all set up, all the latest techno cool gear, 1 billion rounds of ammo. God, I want 1 billion rounds of ammo. And an indoor range. An armory that would be the envy of third world countries. Well, you might actually have that covered, John.
Yes, but I don't have the ammo for all. I mean, I have ammo a little bit, but not the 1 billion rounds, which is sad.
Yes, very sad. Enough precious metals to sink a fishing boat and have already had many years reign for the end of the world as we know it. But you are a day late and $1 short, bub. You have to hurry and catch up. You can't turn on the Discovery Channel, History Channel, Nat Geo, or a dozen other network shows without seeing the multitude of ways our civilization could end. Not counting the far-out scenarios like the end of the Mayan calendar 2012, divine intervention, and zombie and alien interventions. Jonathan, are you an alien interventionist?
Only on Tuesdays, so not when we record.
Oh, okay, good. There are still more than enough plausible possibilities to worry about: economic collapse, pandemics, terrorists, or solar storm generated electromagnetic pulse, nuclear war, the Yellowstone caldera, or other supervolcano eruptions, asteroids, comet, or meteor strikes, reversal of the Earth's magnetic field, and global warming, just to mention a few. You have to get ready now. What happens to your family if any of these civilization-ending events happen tomorrow, and are you or are you not ready? Pedowakia is another animal. I became aware prepping in late 1962 after an American U-2 spy plane took pictures of a nuclear missile base being built in Cuba. And actually, I think we have some concerns about that happening in Venezuela right now. Back then, I was in my early 20s, living in Orlando, Florida, 360 miles from Havana. Even for a kid, it was hard not to notice how scared everyone was. The duck and cover drills at school didn't help much. Did they really think sitting under your desk with your arms over your head helped me survive an atom bomb explosion? It's been said that the Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the world has ever come to nuclear war. Castro and the Russians backed down to Kennedy, but it changed my life forever. My dad and uncle became survivalists. Quote. They built a full bomb shelter in the backyard. Both my dad and uncle were builders, and for a time the shelter was a technical marvel. Waterproof, underground, steel reinforced concrete, glass door with a 90-degree bend entrance. Apparently radiation couldn't turn corners. Who knew? Air filtration pumps, civil defense, radiation detectors, canned food, water storage, bunks, you name it, it had it. All that was nearly a century ago. I wonder if it's still there. Since then, I have moved away, and both my dad and uncle have passed on. I'm now 63 years old and still here. More importantly, the world is still here. As time moved on, I lost interest in getting ready for the end of the world and moved on to making my way through school, the military, a career, and a family. I've always loved the outdoors, hunting, camping, and as the kids got older, my wife and I figured out that camping was a healthy and, more importantly, a cheap way to have fun family outings together. Camping gave me the excuse to drag out some of the old military surplus survival gear I had hung on to over the years, and to get more slowly, I got back into what was then called survivalism. At that time, the Cold War and the threat of nuclear war still limping along, NAM had come and gone, and some scientists had started talking about comet strikes and extinction events. Economically, times were good, then bad, then good again. Theme there, if you missed it. You get the drift. There was a recession in 1973 because of oil prices and high government spending. Side note, I think we might be seeing that again. In 1979 and 80, in the wake of the Iranian Revolution, and I want to stop there for just a second. Are you noticing the funny cycle going on here? And going back into it, the Iranian Revolution, added to by the decision of President Carter to order the end of Iranian imports, there was the oil crisis with huge gas lines. In 1992, it was the Los Angeles riots, and then in 2000, it was Y2K. The point is, as Rosanna Dana used to say, I love that he made that reference, it's always something. If you know what that means, you're not that young either. There always seemed to be something to keep me on the edge and still into prep. Thinking back, it was earlier not to go. Thinking back, it was easier not to go overboard back then. We didn't have all the techno cool stuff that is around today. Freeze dried was what happened to stuff you left in the freezer too long, and a survival rifle was usually a breakdown 22 carried by downed pilots. Mostly, I gathered canned food and camping gear. Back then, we did have a fair amount of surplus gear left over from World War II, the Korean War, and Nam. I remember picking up 2 M1 Garands at the Army-Navy surplus for $20 each. Another quick comment there. So jealous of that, Navy Jim. From time to time, I've asked myself if all the time, effort, and money was wasted. My answer has always been no. I don't think so. I budget a lot for food at lower prices. I ended up with a wonderful woman who enjoyed camping, prepping, and shooting as much as I did. I learned a lot of skills that I could pass on to my kids and others. I spent many quality hours outdoors, and I have a lot of fun along the way. If there was one, my point is you don't have to rush. It's not a good bet that the world will end tomorrow. If you start off in panic mode and begin amassing enormous quantities of stuff just for the sake of having stuff, you end up with a bunch of junk that won't do the job. And then you'll have to spend more cash on the gear that will do the job. If that impacts your life or the lives of your loved ones, it can end up a problem. If I were to give advice, it would be to take your time, research first, and remember that buying the best quality you can afford is the smart way to go, even if you have to wait until you have the cash to buy it. After deciding I want it, I do research to figure out which option would work best for me, how it fits into my preps and gear, and if I can use it now to make my life easier or more fun now. I'm really emphasizing that because that was an important aspect I want people to get. Then I budget for the gear. When I have the cash, I look for the best resource and price and make a purchase. After I purchase, I play with the item, use it, know how it works and where its weaknesses and strengths are. Sometimes that can take a year or more. Don't think I don't still feel the pressure to get the latest and greatest. I still feel the pressure of not having enough stuff or the right stuff. I still run scenarios on what I would need if a car-killing EMP hit while I'm making my 40-mile one-way trip home to work. I still calculate on a regular basis how long my water, food, and other expendables will last. But I have had enough time to understand that most likely things will go on the way they are. I've learned that you can never be totally prepared, just better prepared. I've also learned to resist instant gratification in favor of long-term satisfaction. The world may end tomorrow and you may not be ready, but it's a lot more likely that if you ever do need your preps, it will be because of a much more mundane, but nonetheless important reason, like localized natural disasters such as hurricanes or personal disasters such as job loss. In that case, just having something will leave you better off than most. You don't have to have it all when you're starting out.
That's really well written, and I think it gives a very good point to everyone, which beyond just the perfection aspect, I mean, I think when you take a look at what was said there, it's about the fact that everything is cyclical. You know, we have good times, we have bad times. Right now, depending on how you look at it, I mean, you know, if you went through the Depression, maybe this isn't that bad a time. If you've never been through the Depression, then now would be bad times. But at the end of the day, it's not about preparing for the end of the world. It's about being prepared for every day. It's about knowing what could be tomorrow, knowing that you do have to, you know, as I think it said somewhere in that letter about, you know, going to college, starting a family, doing all those things. Those are the day-to-day things. Making sure your family's safe on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, there may be a nuclear crisis someday, or not. There may be another bank crisis. You know, who knows? The whole mortgage thing could still fall out from underneath us. anything's possible. But at the end of the day, all those things, the big stuff, happen in cycles. And, there are good times and bad times. But there are always personal disasters that occur, even when it's the best of times around the world. Even if world peace took over tomorrow and everybody held hands and sang Kumbaya, you would still have family tragedy. You would still have all of those issues that you need to prepare for. And so it doesn't change that need to prepare. And, as part of this also, I think something to think about is there's no such thing as being perfectly prepared because you can't know what the next cycle is going to be until it gets here.
Jonathan, I think you summed that up and made really great points about what Navy Jim said. It just goes to show, what we can really learn when listening to somebody that's been doing it for a while. The way that really dovetails in the show is the idea that when we focus on these really dramatic things, then we feel this pressure and this urge, like Navy Jim was saying, to have all these really great, cool toys that do everything and to turn ourselves into human Swiss Army knives and really try to go after it. And that is that pressure that we feel to have perfection in survival. And so often I think one of the things that really gets missed about this is the need for community. And we're going to have a show again in the future. We've had a show in the past about talking to others about prepping and stuff. And we're going to do another one here in the near future that has a newer spin on it and a bigger conversation about community. But to lay it out, I think this is one of the things that a lot of people miss, because a lot of people want to, especially when they first get in it, they're concerned about operational security. They're concerned about other people knowing that they're in prep and stuff. And they really miss out on the community aspects. And that's one of the things that we push really hard around here. And I think that's, our big thing with Survival Chi is that it starts with community. And to read one more really great post that I think really kind of shows off the community that is building up on the forum and how great it is and why it's important to have a good, healthy community around survival. And this one comes to us from Hippofeet Bot. He added a bot onto the end of his name for reasons you'd know if you were on the forum. But start off, just putting this out there, I was really impressed with a lot of recent posts. It shows that I made a good choice coming here. The other members seem well grounded, down to earth, and just generally decent folks. This whole recent mess made me think, I need to quick interject. We had a lunatic show up on the forum, and the members got on and quickly let the moderators know that there was somebody that was saying some stuff that was really just completely outside the purview of the forum and was completely inappropriate. And we all jumped on that really quickly. So that's what he was talking about there, so that has some context. The whole recent mess made me think of a conversation I had with a friend a few years back. At the time, he was working in Washington for a think tank, Wargaming Disaster Scenarios for the Government. And yes, he actually did write it out that way. And as can be expected in his line of work and doing the research he had been doing, he was of the opinion that in a real disaster, people would turn on each other in a few days. I told him most people are decent and would help when they could, as much as they could. Now, he was living his entire life in some special forces unit or another. He has been in combat in Bosnia, Africa, Iraq, and now Afghanistan and others. I've been a lot of places as well, many of them bad, all over the world. But I've watched him change a bit, and he is starting to get a very us versus them mentality. It slips out sometimes. It's worrying. It was always supposed to be just about the money and not about sides. For a few years while I was overseas training for things and failing at things, I kind of lost faith a bit too, especially in Africa. You just start to think, if they do it here, then it wouldn't take much for people back home to do that as well. I have another friend and a mentor who was a long-range interdiction specialist in Vietnam. After he got out, he did bad things professionally for a long time. So I guess what I'm saying is that I can easily find myself only talking to people who've been doing things outside society's rules for most of their lives. And I don't think a governmental sanction changes what it does to you. It's super nice to come here and read about some ham radio stuff or what people think about guns that they aren't getting issued to them, or buying from some Armenian in Pakistan tribal areas. I'm not really social where I live. I order supplies on the net. I don't see people at work. It's just me and my girlfriend and a bunch of guys who kill people every day, really. And they're messed up. And a lot of the time. Not like turning bad, just you can't see that stuff and not be affected. No disrespect to the combat tested here. In fact, quite the opposite. I hope this forum sticks around. I don't need to go to the high-speed, low-drag sites. I can just get on the phone for that. I like everyone here. People talk about medical stuff. Not for themselves, but training to help others. How cool is that? So what if people like carrying guns in their front pockets? Who the hell am I to say any different? I mean, really. Laugh out loud. This place is somewhere I can point to and be like, see, people out there are good. And I think that's good for all of us. So that was Hippo's feet, good words. And I think that kind of typifies somebody that is in the profession and in the professional circles that Hippo feet's in. And that's the danger, I think, with a lot of things in survival. If we're so focused on that people are bad or that bad things happen, then we do miss seeing the stuff where we have, like in our community, where we have people training to get rescue skills and medical skills and all kinds of different things, not just to help themselves, but to help others in a disaster. And I think that's the only place we can ever come to where we have any sort of remote possibility of perfection survival, is if we are a willingness not to just help ourselves, but to also help out others within the length of our cable tow, obviously.
Something that, I think we've done the best we can, this whole striving towards perfection thing. I've really done the best we can in pushing the whole idea of community. And I think for both of us, it was really important. And I think I'm going to be honest with everybody. When we first went into CERT, it was all about learning about CERT so that we could better prepare ourselves. And it really wasn't about the community. It wasn't until after we went through CERT that both of us started thinking in terms of, well, a well-prepared community that really knows what's going on is not just good for us, but it's good for everyone. And it helps out everyone. It keeps us safer. It keeps our families safer. It keeps our friends safer. And it keeps the people we call our private community, our personal community, safer. And from there, it kind of spread. And that's really what led us to want to do the show most. I mean, in all honesty, we've got a lot of reasons for why we wanted to do it, talk a lot, make sure there are other crazy people like us out there and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, it was really about driving this community awareness. And that's one of the reasons, like Aaron said, we will be doing a show in the near future about talking about prep. Because one of the interesting things, and it's not just us seeing it, it's other people in the community too, there's a lot of people out there prepping and not very many people out there talking. And I think that does all of us a little bit of a disservice. More people talking about it, more people sharing their ideas, and all of a sudden you get back to the idea of, we talked about it in a previous show, a very recent show, self-sufficiency. And being self-sufficient is really important, being self-reliant. And if you can talk about that with the people you know and get advice and information, we can go back to a time where people really could go to their neighbor and say, hey, I don't know how to do this, and it appears that you do. So why don't we talk? Because I do know how to do something else, and maybe we can share. And that kind of exchange of information is so important. And I think the only way to do that is to talk more about the things we're doing.
I would completely agree with that. Point's very well made, John. And to go into wrapping up the show, the point we've been making today, if you've missed it, is that if you're consumed by the idea that you're going to find perfection in anything, guns, whether it's food, whether it's name something, it doesn't matter what it is, you're not going to find it. What you are going to do is spin yourself into a tight little ball, obsessed with trying to find the absolute perfect solution. And you're going to miss out on some really great stuff, like building a community, or contributing to a community, or just having some good old-fashioned alone time with somebody that you love, or somebody that you like a whole lot, or maybe even miss out on taking a fishing trip that you've been meaning to take for a long time because you're so busy focusing on something that may come in the future. You're not really taking care of yourself in the here and now. And with that, we wrap up episode 73. Thank you for joining us. This has been an episode from the In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival Podcast. You can learn more by visiting intherabbithole.com. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more great survival stuff.